Welcome to everyone for joining us in the Newburyport Literary Festival. A big thanks to the Mighty Blaze team for letting us be part of their inspirational group. They've done a great job promoting this, and we are so appreciative of all of their help. Now, we do ask that you use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen for questions for the author, and I will help moderate that towards the end of our session. And let me just introduce Cynthia Anderson. She's a journalist, author, and lecturer at Boston University. Her new nonfiction book, Home Now, tells the story of refugees transforming the town near where she grew up. Her story collection, River Talk, was a Kirkus Review's Best Book of 2014. Anderson lives with her family in Maine and Massachusetts. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Jen. And good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Thanks to the festival for reconfiguring itself into this amazing two-day event, and to Vicki and the rest of the staff for all of your hard work. So, Home Now. This is Home Now, how 6,000 refugees transformed an American town. That town being Lewiston, Maine, which is about 40 miles down the Androscoggin River from where I grew up. So when I was a kid, Lewiston was sort of the center of the universe. My family went there often. We had relatives there, and we shopped often on Lisbon Street, which was a bustling, thriving place when I was a kid. So this was the 70s. And even then, Lewiston was in decline. We didn't know it as kids, but the mills and the factories, the textile factories and the shoe mills were fading, and population was already starting to drop. That continued through the 70s and the 80s into the 90s. So that by the time I was, a young adult, Lewiston was in pretty tough shape. And things didn't change a whole lot through the 90s. There was, kind of a tenuous renaissance, I guess, where you had some service industries beginning to fill the industrial void, but Lewiston was a place that was feeling more and more empty. So I wrote Home Now because by the time new immigrants started, or after new immigrants started arriving in the early 2000s, it began to be clear that the city was undergoing a pretty profound transformation. And that continued through the 2000s and still continues. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But I also wrote Home Now because it became clear to me over time that Lewiston was a place where people of widely disparate backgrounds were somehow finding accord. The new immigrants had come to Lewiston from large US cities where the federal government had originally resettled them, initially mostly from refugee camps in Somalia. So these new folks were living in places like Atlanta and Dallas, places where they didn't really want to stay and raise their kids. They weren't that comfortable in large urban environments. And so a handful of families wound up in Portland, and from there moved up to Lewiston, and it continued. It was a tough time for the city in the beginning. Lewiston was not rich at that point, and there was, for example, just a single ESL teacher in the school system. And also people were still kind of reeling in the aftermath of 9/11. So there were some tough times in the beginning, and yet, the city has adapted. The newcomers have found their way with what I consider to be remarkable grace, and continues to find its way. And you know, it gives me hope. And that's a huge part of why I wrote the book. It gives me hope. It gives me hope, especially now as we, you know, as our nation struggles again. So for entirely different reasons, of course, but you know, but here we are. So that was early 2000s, post 9/11, and you know, a time again now where we really must, you know, come together. So I thought I would begin by reading a little bit that shows the journey, I think, or begins to suggest anyway, the journey of one couple, one longtime Lewistonian couple in particular. So if you can bear with me, I will find my place. It's short, couple of pages. For some in Lewiston, the kinship they feel with Muslim neighbors started out as wariness. The south end of Lisbon Street holds most of the Somali-owned shops. Banks, law offices, and restaurants occupy the northern blocks. Doobie's flower shop sits in between. Inside, it could be 1980 or 2020. Deb and Skip Gerard intend it that way. Deb's been making a version of that daisy-dotted get well arrangement for a quarter of a century. The air smells good of plant respiration and flowers. 18 years ago, when the first Somalis showed up, Deb and Skip didn't know what to think. They were not overjoyed. The city had been through so much already. Doobie's was doing okay, but Deb and Skip were far from rich. A Somali store opened next door, the now familiar assortment of fabrics and foodstuffs. Men in Macawis started congregating outside on the sidewalk. They weren't unfriendly, but they weren't that warm. Deb felt intimidated coming and going from her shop. She told Skip. Skip avoids confrontation. He thought a long while about what to do. Weeks passed. Deb still felt unhappy. Both worried their customers might stop coming. Finally, Skip went over to talk with the men and the store owner. What happened next? Deb says. What happened next was they listened to Skip, says Skip. They were respectful and polite. The men stopped congregating, stopped gathering on the sidewalk. A big relief, Deb says. Over time, the Gerards became friendly with the store owner. A few Somalis came into the flower shop to buy things, then a few more. A woman ordered floral arrangements for her daughter's wedding. A year passed. Skip started carrying slips of paper in his wallet, useful phrases in Somali. He still has them, dog-eared now. Good morning. Subah wanag san. How are you? Iska Warren. Skip was interested in their culture, Deb says. She's reserved. He's more outgoing. Over time, Skip got close with two young Somali guys. They stop in with friends sometimes to chat and ask for advice about, say, buying a car or renting a tux. Things are pretty good, Skip says, of his and Deb's relations with the newcomers now and of the city's overall. It did take a while to adjust, he says, the way it did with earlier immigrants. Skip is French Canadian. He grew up hearing stories about families like his coming down from Quebec, the resistance they encountered, the discrimination. There's one noticeable difference though, Skip says. Work. Deb rolls her eyes. He's conservative, she not so much. Skip, she says, no, listen. The French Canadians would move in one day and start work the next. That was just what they did. Things were different then, Skip. Lots of jobs for one thing. And don't forget, they weren't refugees, Deb says. Skip, these young Somali guys come in, I tell them, listen, my grandfather came from Canada and right away he got a job, Skip says. Back then it was, if you can walk, you can work. Every able-bodied person should work. I could take someone down right now and get them a job at Burger King. Deb, Burger King doesn't pay a living wage, Skip. Most of the mill jobs did. Skip pauses. That's true, he says. He has other opinions. He wishes, for instance, that women would remove their hijabs when not in the mosque so they wouldn't stand out so much. Deb reminds him, most women choose to cover their head. It's their right, she says. Skip nods, smiles wryly. He and Deb differ on some things, but they let it go. He thinks it should be that way with the newcomers and longtime residents. Deb and Skip have changed. A Somali cafe owner who's since moved used to come in and buy a lot of flowers. He and Deb would chat. One day at a meeting of local business owners, he said, I go into the flower lady's shop, but she's never come to my restaurant. He was right. I never had, Deb says. She went in a few days later and ordered food. Delicious, she says. I don't know why I didn't do it sooner. You weren't ready, Skip says. Deb nods. You have to be ready. So, a lot of people have had similar journeys to that. And of course, you know, the newcomers have had the biggest journeys of all and the largest adjustments. Home Now focuses on 5 newcomers. Excuse me just for a second while I find my other note. Well, I'm not finding my notes. Well, I'll just tell you, there are 5 principal threads in Home Now. The first and probably the most central thread is carried by a young Somali refugee, single mom, working single mom named Jamila Moline. She has 2 children. The second thread is held by a community leader, Fatima Hussein, who has lived in Lewiston now for 20 years and is the head of what used to be United Somali Women, now the Immigrant and Refugee Services. So actually, I think what I'll do is queue up my slideshow and tell you more about the 5 principal thread holders whose stories are told in Home Now, and a few other things as we go along. So we're set. Are we set up for screen share here, Jen? Can I just click through?
You can share your screen.
Okay, super. Okay. I'm going to try to maximize. I'm having a little trouble. The window is in the way there. Here we go. Okay, so I'll just click through. There's about 30 slides. Mostly these are, so some of these are slides that appeared with previous magazine stories that I did. Most are actually taken on cell phones by friends in the community who were gracious enough to share with me. So here we go. Okay, so here's Jamila in one of the downtown shops on Lisbon Street with her daughter, Aaliyah, who is much younger than. I've known them now for 4 years. So Aaliyah is now 7. I think she was probably 3.5 or 4 in this photo. Downtown on Lisbon Street. So here's another thread holder, Karis Ngoy. He's a Congolese asylum seeker, and at the time,
we're not seeing the pictures change. We still see the person in the red hoodie walking across the field.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, my husband just came up to tell me the same thing. Let's see. All right. Let's see how we can. I'm going to stop the share and start it again. We may have to go do a workaround here. Are you seeing now a slide of a woman on a cell phone?
Yes.
Okay, I may have to just toggle back and forth and stop sharing each time. Okay, sorry everyone. So this is Jamila Moline with her daughter Aaliyah. And as I mentioned before, Jamila holds one of the main threads in the book and undergoes her own pretty profound transformation. She really finds her way in the course of Home Now. So just a second. I'm sorry, this is going to take a little bit longer. Maybe what I'll do is scroll through, Jen, and just show the main slides.
I think that's good because we are going to run out of time, although right now there are no questions queued up. So folks, if you do have a question, please put it into the Q&A and I'll try to save a minute or two at the end for some questions.
Okay. All right, so now we have Karis coming. Just a second. So Karis, in this photo, he's 19. He comes in the course of the book. He arrives in Lewiston alone. His family has sent him from Congo because of the ongoing strife, civil strife, and out of real fear and concern for Karis's life. So he is a student at LHS when his story, Lewiston High School, when his story opens. He meets another young Congolese asylum seeker. So let me just say parenthetically that currently about 3/4 of newcomers in Lewiston are Somali refugees, and the other quarter are Africans from other parts of the continent, many of those of whom are asylum seekers. So Karis, let me show you. I'll show you a couple more and then we'll get on to some questions, I hope. Oh, here we go. This one that will work. So this is Abdelkader Nagehi and his wife Ikran. Abdelkader is also a community leader like Fatuma Hussein. He and Ikran now have 5 children. He's younger than this when the story opens, and he too is trying to figure out his place in Lewiston. He now runs a nonprofit, the MEARS, which provides resources to new immigrants and also to other, mainly young people in Lewiston. Does a lot of after-school tutoring and mentoring, and has some soccer teams, and has begun more and more over time to work with adults too, with ESL or ELL, as the case may be. So those are 3 of the principles. Another principle, another person in the book is Nasafari Nahumire, another young Congolese woman whose father originally arrived in the country without the rest of the family, and worked years because they'd been separated, again, due to the strife there, and was finally able to bring his wife and daughters over. And Nasafari's story in Home Now focuses on her. The family has been here longer than Abdelkader and Ikran, and the focus in Nasafari's story is sort of navigating the whole college process, and her relationship in her family. They're Christian, fairly traditional, and aren't so sure they want Nasafari going away to college, especially not to New York City, which is where she has her heart set on going. She wants to become a lawyer. So there's a lot of focus on that, on her story in the book as well. So do we have questions, Jan, or shall I continue?
No, the questions are rolling in now. So
All right.
we probably will only be able to do a few of them, but let me try to hit some of the common ones. There's definitely interest about, are any of these folks at risk from ICE, and are they protected? Like, what's their status from an immigration point of view?
Yeah. Okay, so the situation with refugees is quite different from that of people who arrive as asylum seekers. Refugees are, they have the equivalent of a green card after they've been in the U.S. for a very short time. So they are protected. What's happening with asylum seekers is very different. So someone like Karis arrives in the United States and applies for asylum, and the process, well, in Karis's case, is taking, I guess it's now been 5 years. First you apply for an interview, and then the whole asylum process itself is terrifically bogged down. So my hope is that eventually Karis will achieve asylum, but in the meantime, he lives in kind of a limbo. He does have a work permit, although that's temporary. It expired at one point. He had to apply for another one. So he has been able to work, and he did manage to save enough money and had a small scholarship to go to the University of Southern Maine, though when his work permit expired, he had to drop out because he didn't have enough money. So he struggled. He's not in imminent danger of deportation, but nor is he yet granted the right to permanently remain in the US. Yeah.
There are so many good questions here that I'm so sorry we're not going to be able to get to all of them. So one of the questions is, about how the immigrants found work in a city that wasn't very strong economically when they arrived, and has their arrival helped the economy in any way?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Initially what I saw in Lewiston was, so here's, this situation is this. There are a lot of minimum wage jobs. And in the beginning, you saw newcomers, especially before folks had really solid, language skills, working in custodial positions in hotels and schools and hospitals, sometimes in big box stores stocking shelves. Things have really changed over the years. Now you see new immigrants pretty much in every job sector. So remember, this is, we're 20 years in now. So now you see folks in healthcare and education and retail, transportation, manufacturing, including at a new LL Bean boot making facility. Which was established in part, I was told, by a Bean spokesperson, because they felt they could fill the jobs. And we also are seeing many, many young people going off to college and graduating, some going on for graduate degrees. And I think the big question in Lewiston, not just for new immigrants, but for all young people, and everyone really in Lewiston, is, what will evolve in terms of living wage jobs. There are many, but there need to be many, many more living wage jobs. And that's, that still remains a question.
So what about roles in civil service or in the city government? We had a few questions about that, if they able to get
right. So the first new immigrant, a young Somali woman, was recently elected to Lewiston City Council, Safia Khalid. And the interesting thing about that, and there have been a couple of other Somalis in positions. There was someone on the school board, I believe, actually two people, I think, on the school board. In both cases, they were non-elected. So Sophia was the first person elected in Lewiston to position, I believe. And what was remarkable about that is that Sophia was elected in a ward that was not primarily new immigrant. So I think that speaks again to this accord that folks have found in Lewiston, that that certainly wasn't there 20 years ago, when the earliest Somali refugees showed up.
Cynthia, thank you so much for joining us. There are so many other fantastic questions here, but there's just no way for me to keep going. Unfortunately, we're going to have to end this session because we have another one back to back. But everyone who joined, thank you so much for joining and for submitting these questions. And Cynthia, thank you to you for spending your morning with us. This is a really fascinating story. So if folks have not read the book, I highly recommend it, Home Now. And please consider buying it at an independent bookstore. So we want to keep those alive during these quarantine times. So thank you very much, everyone. I hope if you're here, that means you've seen our whole schedule, and I hope we'll have you on another event. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jen, for hosting. Thank you, everyone, for attending.